Hello and welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. According to the UN, 1/3 of all food produced in the world, approximately 1.3 billion tons, is lost or wasted every year. That, along with the other waste, for instance, the 300 million tons of plastic which is discarded after one-time use only, contributes to environmental degradation. What is most baffling, however, is that we humans, after approximately 600 million years of evolution, still knowingly litter. Now, it's not a debate of whether this is wrong or right. Littering could provide no benefits at all. But what impact does it make on the environment? To talk about this, we are joined by Mr. Svein Tveitdal, who is a former UN Director on Climate Change, joining us from Norway. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Let's begin with how litter and garbage is largely composed of items such as plastic, such as food. When these are burned, when they are not disposed of properly, what happens to the environment?
Well, I would say that litter is one of the biggest problems we have in the world. And we cannot continue without solving the problem. But the good thing is that there are solutions. I can mention, for instance, what experience here from Norway. We are in a way collecting and reusing 83% of the litter. At my home, we have different boxes for paper, for plastic, for metal, and so forth. And this goes back to treatment and recirculation, also as input to producing electricity.
Yeah. So, Mr. Svein, you mentioned here how Norway is reusing 83% of the litter. But I wonder, in the world at large, do you think that the recycling system is broken in any situation when we hear so much about marine life being at threat because plastic wasn't disposed of properly and because plastic keeps on going into the environment? What can you tell us about that?
Well, you all have seen on television the whales that is filled up with plastic. If we are not stopping the current trend, there will be as much plastic in the oceans as fish in 2050, and we cannot live with that. But again, there are solutions also in the developing world. I used to work in Kenya, in Nairobi, and there was a lot of litter. But a couple of years ago, there was a ban on plastic bags. So when you're landing in Nairobi now, you are warned that if I bring a plastic bag into the country, I can be fined. So that has made a lot of difference. So now you can hardly see a plastic bag in Nairobi.
Yeah, but we're talking about developed nations here. But we also know that why plastic is so ubiquitous is because of its cheap cost to produce, and that it's even more cheap to reproduce plastic as opposed to recycling it. So what would you say at the world at large, what policies need to be implemented to adopt such progressive measures in order to counter this litter problem that we have?
But yeah, the main thing is that you need to stop, in a way, spreading it in the nature. I think a big part of the plastic pollution of the oceans is now coming out of 10 main rivers in your part of the world. But for instance, another example I just saw is that India now, because we're also importing solid waste and scrap, for instance, from the US, India has now put a stop on that, and that is an easy thing to do. So in a way, I think the citizens, of course, understand that what you see on the television there now is something they don't like. So they are motivated. So this is something the politicians need to, in a way, take a grip on, and that is possible. Don't import waste and put up regulations so that you are not allowed to put waste and plastic out in the nature. That is up to the politicians, and I think they will be popular if they take such a decision and really do it.
And Mr. Svein, you mentioned certain possibilities of countering this, certain policies that need to be put in place. But do you think on an international scale there is enough consensus amongst governments, there is enough cooperation and collaboration amongst governments to tackle this issue?
No, there is not. For instance, where I used to work as a director in the United Nations Environment Programme, which is headquartered in Nairobi, they are trying to come up with a global agreement, which they pushed now on the latest governing council. And some countries is in a way sabotaging this, so that you and UN need to work after
a consensus. Could you name some of those
principle.
countries that are sabotaging this?
Well, as of now, I'm not 100% sure who they were, but if you go back, for instance, now to climate change, and which is a different issue, but they are related. On the latest climate change summit actually in Krakow, in Katowice, people that sabotaged that one in a way and undermined the IPCC was the US, Russia, it was Kuwait. And but on the plastic, you can.
And Mr. Svein, what is the rhetoric that's given out by these countries, these governments, when they choose to pull out of something such as the Paris Agreement, something that was supposed to move towards creating guidelines for communities at large?
No, the problem is that if you want to stick to the Paris Agreement, which, for instance, President Trump doesn't want, is that you have to, in a way, stop short time profit on some of the polluting industries, and there is a tremendous lobbying for that. And you have to invest now so that our children and grandchildren doesn't get a higher bill in the future. And that is, in a way, a political challenge. And in a way, it's a little bit the same on waste, that we need to spend money now to avoid a disaster for our children. An example from Norway is that me as a citizen, I need to pay money to the municipality that is collecting the waste, so that most of the funding here is put back on taxes, actually.
Yeah, and Mr. Svein, you mentioned here how industries play a role and how they interfere, and there's political alliances which prevent taking measures. Could you mention some of those industries, some of those private companies that produce a large amount of waste which is not being treated properly and which is going into the environment and harming us all?
Well, I think very many big companies, in a way, take a responsible kind of attitude, so that they are doing something to try to stop the pollution. I won't mention exactly what companies they are now. I know them well.
But what about the industries?
No, the industries is, of course, producing all the litter that we are putting into the nature. But it is also up to us as individuals and up to the politicians.
And which ones,
to, in a way,
which specific industries would these be? Would it be the beverage industry? Would it be the processed food industry? Which one do you think has the greatest amount of burden when it comes to this issue?
Well, you want me to mention a particular company, and I won't do that because I have not the sufficient insight in the waste area. I could do it if you come to climate change. But the point is that also we as consumers are in a way responsible. We can use our money, for instance, to boycott companies, and then they would like to invest in a way, make the straws out of something that is not as dangerous as plastic. I know, for instance, in Vietnam and Thailand, they are now swapping plastic packaging with banana leaves. There are always solutions, but the market will not solve the problems. So it is actually, and we cannot in a way blame the industry if they are allowed to go ahead.
There needs
so
to
we
be
have
strict. implementation.
We need more to blame the politicians that are not putting up the rules and regulations so that we can solve this problem, which is solvable.
Mr. Svein, I take your point there. So something I want to move on to is duty of civilians and citizens. How do you think awareness can be disseminated into the communities, a greater amount of awareness, so that people educate themselves regarding this?
I think there is absolutely a rising awareness here in Norway, and I know in many other parts of the world, there is a lot of people in a way going on the shores and picking up plastic and put it back for recirculation. I think these things from we see the whales, for instance, and that they are dying from plastic is in a way rising the awareness. And in the last couple of years, the problem on plastic has been much higher on the political agenda, and I think worldwide. I'm not so sure how it is in Pakistan, but it is getting higher up on the agenda, and it is a problem that it is possible to solve. So my key point is that politicians need to, in a way, set up regulations to stop the pollution, and I think they will be more popular amongst the voters and in the civil society that would like to live in a clean environment.
Yes. Definitely. Thank you so much, Mr. Tveitdal. Now we're joined by Dr. Javed Ali Khan, who is the UN Habitat Program Manager, joining us from Lahore. Thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Javed, for joining us. Let me begin with you. How do you see the state of the environment in terms of how it is polluted and how littered it is?
It's really very unfortunate in the sense that we are not able to manage our litters properly. It needs more kind of civic inculcation of civic sense in people. Because if we have a very bad habit, even the educated people do not really care so much. So that is why you can see the scale of the problem ever increasing, probably with the increase in population. So with the time, instead of becoming manageable, it is still fairly unmanageable.
And Dr. Javed, you mentioned here with the increasing population, we're going to see a surge in this issue. But can you also tell us what makes up the bulk of the litter present in the environment?
It's about 20 million tons of litters that is produced in Pakistan annually, and we were just chatting among our colleagues, and Pakistan produces about 22 million tons of wheat every year. So the amount of wheat that we produce, almost the similar amount of waste that we generate, you know. So it's very pathetic. We need to be very conscious. And actually, because of the inability of the civic institutions, the waste is not properly managed. The third tier of government, which is the local bodies institutions, are extremely weak. And these are the real causes, together with the lack of civic sense and responsibility.
So, Dr. Javed, hold on to that thought. I also want to introduce another guest who has just, Mr. Ahmad Akif, who is a member of Prime Minister's Inspection Commission, joining us from Islamabad. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. In regards to garbage littering, we were talking about civic sense. Now, we know countries such as Singapore and many other nations which impose very heavy fines for littering. Why do you think this is not implemented in countries all across the board?
Thank you very much for having me. In order for that civic sense to develop, you require a starting point. While the implementation of the law is also important, but in case of the law, implementation and respect go hand in hand. One feeds into the other. So you need the strong arm of the law to implement any of the rules. And that civic sense requires a behavior modification. That would come from schools, from homes, from the media. I've seen that some of the media have been propagating these small films inculcating behavior modification.
Yeah.
So if you all work together, then, but in case of the cities in Pakistan, the municipalities, there's also a capacity issue. The cities do not have the capacity to pick up all the garbage also.
Yeah.
And the people are not willing to pay what is required for municipal services.
And Mr. Abu Ahmed, let me ask you this. Also, when we're discussing this in a global context, what do you think has caused the rise and surge of so much waste? Of course, the population is increasing, but what does that have to do with industrialization? And what do you think the role industries are playing into this phenomena?
I mean, originally industries were producing a lot of man-made chemicals, plastics, and needless packaging. So we now need to control how much packaging we are using. Like, for instance, single-use plastic bottles are one of the biggest pollutants of the oceans.
Yeah.
It is estimated that there will be more plastic in the oceans than fish in the next 50 years. And Indus is one of the most polluted rivers in the world. So, I mean, every time that we dispose of, so we need to start using multiple-use bottles. We cannot, I mean, you cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet.
Yeah. Mr. Akif, so the issue that I see with this is when we talk about materials that can be recycled, often we hear about biodegradable materials, but they are much more costly than, for, let's say, plastic. So how do we reconcile this issue of cost and what is better for the environment?
I mean, one, I would dispute the fact that they are not very expensive, because the plastic, the biodegradable plastic law has been enforced in Islamabad, and most of the formal sector in Islamabad uses biodegradable bags. So it is, I mean, and as the use increases, as the economies of scale come in,
yeah.
And I mean, it is not a matter of if we want to do it. It is a matter of we must do it.
Yeah. And where does this sense of urgency come in from? What have you witnessed, let's say, in the past decade or the past couple of years, in which this alarmism, and we're seeing this all across the world, where people are giving more and more attention to how plastic is polluting, for instance, the oceans. What do you think this, where this alarmism came from?
I mean, it is not an alarmism, I think. It has been growing steadily. I mean, countries like Kenya also, which are much less developed than Singapore, have enforced a countrywide ban on plastic.
Yeah.
So you need to provide, I mean, the alternates will come in as the law is implemented. So unfortunately, if you are not implementing the law, the alternates don't develop. I mean, in my childhood, I remember we didn't have all these bags. And we used to carry our own cloth bags and we had those date palm baskets also.
Yeah.
So because it was, I mean, the plastic provided a very, I mean, easy alternate, but that easy alternate had consequences.
Yeah. And Mr. Akif, when you talked about civic sense here and developing a sort of behavioral change through the media, through schools and everything, do you think that onus lies on largely? Do you think it's the government that needs to create this awareness, or do you think it's the private citizens? Where would you see that?
It begins at home. So I mean, the government is not something external to us. It is within ourselves. The government is also formed of individuals. And so if individuals, I mean, just the fact that you're having this program today is a step in the right direction. So if we have more programs like this, and I've seen schools which celebrate the World Environment Day,
yeah,
and the children have got whole clothing made out of wrappers. And so, I mean, this needs to be inculcated individually.
Yeah.
There's no shortcut to it. But of course, the government must realize that in Pakistan, for instance, we don't have even a single scientifically managed landfill site. Even the capital does not have a landfill site. And so we just dump the garbage in some corner.
Yeah.
Lahore has possibly one landfill site, which is now full, I think.
And Mr. Akif, stay with me on that point. To ask Dr. Javed here, what happens to the environment when we do not dispose of garbage properly? What happens in terms of air pollution? What gases are released into the environment that exacerbate the issue of climate change?
Certainly, Michelle, actually, there are different kind of wastes that create different impacts. So if we are burning plastics, then it is extremely carcinogenic gases. If it blocks the visibility, the thick smogs every year. It really disturbs the communication system between. Earlier, it was very limited, say around Islamabad. But then now, this year, it was impacting up to Peshawar, and even much, it is multiplying actually. So the impact is becoming much more severe. The emissions is not only coming out from the burning of litters, but it also comes from the chimneys of the industries, the brick kilns, and all different kind of vehicular emissions. So all these have different impacts. It releases lead, it releases sulfur, it releases many different kind of...
Dr. Javed, hold on to that thought. I want to ask Mr. Akif something in relation to this. When we talk about taking a control on the environment, taking a control on climate change, how important and how vital is cross-border cooperation in this regard? Now, we know that there are tensions at the border with India and Pakistan. But despite political differences, when we're talking about the environment, and that's something that affects us all, how very integral is this?
I mean, cross-border cooperation is very integral because every year in Lahore, you see that, especially in the winter months, the problem with smog. Smog is basically smoke and fog coming together. And you see that life almost comes to a standstill. The motorways are closed down. And even sometimes the schools are closed down because you've got breathing problems and, the economic activity comes to a halt. So the kind of losses which are created only by environmental pollution are very staggering. The World Bank estimates that the environmental losses, climate change losses in Pakistan are about $4 billion, which translates into 600 billion rupees per year or 1.5 billion rupees a day. Every time that the economic activity comes to a standstill, people's livelihoods are affected. Yeah.
We are now also joined by Ms. Maryam Shabbir, who is an environmentalist joining us from Islamabad. Thank you so much, Ms. Maryam, for joining us. You must be hearing into the conversation that we were having about cross-border cooperation and collaboration between nation states when it comes to issues such as climate change. What are your opinions on that? And do you think the world at large is doing enough to move towards this cooperation?
Thank you very much, Meshal. Well, there are different kind of climate issues on which we need collaboration. Some we need at domestic level, and for some we need at regional level. And for air pollution, we does need cross-boundary collaboration because air pollution needs no borders. And like Akif Saab just mentioned that we experience a lot of cost because of this. And without, this climate change issues, and if we talk about waste management issues and all that, if I link that to waste management, there are the South Asian markets are always preferred to dump waste from the Western countries, from European countries. If you talk about solid waste, if I talk about plastic waste, in last few months there were, 2 full trucks full of plastics which were brought from the Europe by some of the private members.
And Ms. Maryam, doesn't that highlight the absolute hypocrisy when more developed nations state that we need to work towards finding solutions, but then they see countries in the South Asian sphere as dumping grounds?
To some extent, I have to agree with that because that's what we always highlight. By we, I meant the developing country at Conference of Parties, which last year happened in December as well in Poland, where we were highlighting the issues which South Asian countries are experiencing at large, because the developing countries are the one who are victim of climate change and other kind of pollution. And when it comes to the payment issues, which legally the developed countries were part of, and they were supposed to pay us for the damage they have caused, but they're not paying. So to that extent, I do agree with that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ms. Maryam Shabbir, for giving us your thoughts on that. Thank you so much, Dr. Javed Ali Khan, for joining us. Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmad Akif, for joining us. We have to take a short break. Stay with us for more stories. Welcome back to Indus Special. While we continue our discussion, now we discuss the global heat wave. According to a monthly report from the World Meteorological Society, this past March was the world's second warmest on record. Experts say that the world will face longer, more intense heat waves as average temperatures go up. With summer approaching and the world witnessing more extreme weather conditions, it is of utmost importance to remember how we must protect ourselves from the scorching heat. Heat waves, after all, can be life-threatening, and they take hundreds of lives all across the world annually. To discuss this further, we are joined by Dr. Daniyal Nagi, consultant physician and clinical lead. He is joining us from Ireland. Thank you so much, Dr. Daniyal, for joining us. Dr. Daniyal, just to give the audience a sense of how severe heat waves can be, please take us through this.
Okay. Thank you, Meshal, for inviting me to this show and sharing some views with you. Basically, we have to understand in a global perspective. Yeah. There's been a change in the global temperature all over the world. Now you see more intense winters and more intense summers. And even in Europe here, the winters started late, but there's still winters. And obviously, on the eastern side in our country, in Pakistan, the summers are starting earlier and the temperatures are really hitting high, like something in mid-40s. Yeah. Last year we heard about that. So because of this global shift in the temperature, which might be because of a lot of urbanizations, cars, pollutions, industrializations, all this contributes to the global heat. This results from the human health point of view on a lot of diseases, and which can be both related to heat and infectious disease that can come up and affects the population at large in Pakistan, where the health facilities, as compared to the other countries, are quite at the basic level. Yeah. So in order to this, I think the best thing should be that people should be aware about it, identify them as quick as possible, and to, apart from preventive things, to get the required treatment at the earliest. Yeah. So
Dr. Daniyal, you mentioned that there are a number of illnesses and diseases that affect civilians and people at large when these heat waves take place. Could you take us through them?
Yeah, from the extreme rise in temperature, we can classify them into two groups. First would be the heat stroke and the heat exhaustion. Yeah. When the human body is led to extreme temperatures with lack of adequate intake of water and facilities, the human body tends to get dehydrated. It starts with heat exhaustion in the first phase, and if not treated further, it goes to a heat stroke. So that's what we experienced, I think so a few years ago. I was reading the paper and I saw on the television also in Karachi, a lot of people died there. Yeah. So that's because the temperature went up, people were not aware. There was obviously some electricity failures there also. And the air conditioning was not there, or normal preventive measures were not there. People were not taking adequate water, and because of the physical work, they were exposed to heat. That led to, it starts with just simple headache, a lot of sweating, feeling of tiredness, exhaustion, dizziness, and then it leads to collapse with the rise in temperature.
So, Dr. Daniyal, you listed out the categories of the diseases and the illnesses that can take place in extreme weather conditions. Could you tell the audience how they can identify if they are suffering from heat exhaustion or a heat stroke? What are the symptoms?
First is the diseases that directly occur because of the heat stroke and heat exhaustion. That's one part. Other is with extreme temperatures, there's a lot of infectious disease that can crop up, like enteric fever, typhoid. That comes very common in Lahore. I worked there, I know that, in Pakistan. Secondarily, because of poor sanitation conditions, the hepatitis A and E are also on the rise there.
Yeah.
So all these things can go side by side. On one side, you will have bacteria and viruses coming up. Other side, because of lack of sanitation, you can have hepatitis A and E. On the other end, there would be, I'll suggest, heat stroke and heat exhaustion.
Yeah.
People should take two measures, preventive and treatable. First of all, in identifying, they have to be careful when they go out in the heat. They should wear a cap, or they should wear some kind of a headscarf or cover to prevent direct heating by the sun.
Yeah.
They should prefer going out unnecessarily in the heat times, but I think it starts at 11 o'clock and goes till 3 or 4. So unless it's absolutely necessary, don't go bareheaded out there. Keep some water with you. The moment you start feeling tired, exhaustive, increase in temperature, sweating and feeling dizziness, like you're going to fall off, or getting spins in the head, they should immediately go to a cooler place and seek medical help.
So you would recommend that people, as soon as they feel lightheaded, they would immediately go seek out medical help?
As soon as possible.
Definitely.
As soon as possible. They should be, and thing is, the patients have to be, or people have to be careful themselves to identify these things at the earliest.
Yeah. So Dr. Daniyal, hold on to that thought. I also want to bring Dr. Ayesha Khan, who has just joined us, a nutritionist from Lahore, into this conversation. Dr. Ayesha, as you must have been hearing Dr. Daniyal talk about these preventive measures that people need to take, what could you tell us from a nutritional point of view? What do people need to do to keep their bodies hydrated in this scorching heat?
Thank you, Meshal. Thank you so much for taking me on board. Like it has already been discussed that for the optimal health, a good hydration is actually required. And a body human composition is about like 70% that is water.
Yeah.
So the good idea is to replenish the lost water from the body. And the water lost from the body could be like, from the insensible losses, from like, the perspiration and from the sweat and from the urination. So one has to make sure that there is a good balance between the output and the input of the water loss. So what we can do is, nothing can beat the natural clean water. I mean, nothing can beat the natural clean water. That is the main thing. But other than that, any drink that is like, free of the preservatives, and that can further not act as a diuretic, because one has to make sure that when the summers are around the corner, or there is like a scorching heat outside, one has to make sure that one should not mistake certain liquids as for the replenishment of water.
Which liquids would these be?
Diuresis. For example, the different sorts of green teas sometimes can diurese us. So that is another loss of the water from the body. So simple water plus the fruit juices which are natural, plus the other liquids like smoothies, certain fruits which are like for instance like vegetables like cucumber, fruits like watermelon, they are like 95% water.
So fruit-based vegetables and fruits should be integrated into the diet here.
For sure, yes, the fruits should be integrated into the diet. And on the other side, you have to take certain measurements that can, you can always cut down on the preserved food items in your food intake, so that it doesn't cause excess of the thirst in the body.
Yeah.
That is like one thing. And cut out on the diuretic food items from the body.
Okay.
Plus, while there is a scorching heat, there is a loss of water along with the electrolytes from the body. So at the same time, you have to replenish the electrolytes.
Yeah. So Dr. Ayesha, you've highlighted how important it is to keep the body hydrated. Dr. Daniyal, moving back to you, I just want to ask do you think there are certain individuals, certain age groups that are more vulnerable to these heat strokes? Because there are reports that come out that say that heat strokes are more likely to cause death amongst those who already have a chronic illness. It might not be that grave for those who have healthy bodies.
Meshal, the thing is, there are two things. The extremes of the age, like the young and the old, they are always exposed.
Yeah.
So they are the vulnerable groups. People working outside or in the sun is the second group. Secondarily, people who are diabetic or who have got other chronic illnesses going on, they are obviously at risk. Now, for the general masses, because our country is quite big and there's a lot of population there and they're even in the villages, we have to be very careful, as Dr. Ayesha has said, for nutrition and the replacement of the electrolytes in the body. So I'll suggest a packet of ORS is quite enough. That can replace adequate amount of salts and minerals lost from the body. Yeah. So if people who are working outside take ORS regularly, that can help in addition to normal water. If you can't get ORS, it's very simple to make. It's just a liter of water with one tablespoon of salt and 3 of sugar. That can also replace it in the villages. But now I think it's available freely. So people should take these precautions, the younger and the older age groups, plus fluids and water, plus a bit of ORS is very helpful there.
Yeah, it will be effective.
Ramadan is coming around, so in this weather also, people should avoid unnecessary exposure to heat outside.
Yeah. Dr. Ayesha, we are short on time, but the last question I'd like to put on to you is that Muslims all across the world will observe Ramadan this year, and it's going to be taking place during the summers. During that fasting season, what are the tips that people need to keep in mind in order to ensure that their bodies are hydrated and they have proper nutritional value during this heat?
Okay. Since we all know that Ramadan is like the month of spiritual detoxification also, so at the same time people can indulge into certain activities which can even detox their health also. So as far as we all are aware of the fact that there is post sunrise and pre-sunrise and post sunset, there are 2 meals primarily. So one has to keep in mind that as far as the total rehydration of the body is concerned, or the hydration of the body is concerned, in any case, about approximately 2 points. There's a rough idea that every person is an individual, so it's always a personalized requirement, but roughly around 2 to 2.25 liters of liquid is required. So it could be replenished through certain the drinks, which should be natural in nature. It should be free of the preservatives. It should be replenishing not only the water intake, but also at the same time should energize the people as well. Yeah. So it could be smoothies, shakes, water itself, lemonade, as Dr. Daniyal said, that simple sugar, salt, and at the same time, lemon could be used as something that can replenish their water intake as well. In addition to this, one has to make sure that to prevent the dehydration, certain food items that are aggressively catering to provide them excessive of the salt, excessive of the fat, that should be avoided. Yeah. Because of by the virtue of consuming such things, they are more vulnerable to dehydration as well.
Yeah.
So they have to maintain a good hemodynamically stable system inside the body, so that 30 days of fasting could be a source of pleasure for them.
Take your point, Dr. Ayesha Khan. Thank you so much for sharing that insight with us. Thank you, Dr. Daniyal Nagi, for highlighting how grave heat strokes and heat waves can be exactly. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next week with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.